I don't know what a Warhammer is, but everything I've seen from the outside looks cool as hell. I want to know what it is. I want to see the Warhammer. I want to taste the Warhammer. Thing is, I think you're supposed to have money to enjoy the property, and I'm a currently self-employed multimedia personality, so that's a non-starter. Once again, video games save the day. I've had my eye on this game Rogue Trader for a while. The pitch of being dropped into the Warhammer universe and allowed to navigate its CRPG style is appealing to me. It's how I fell in love with the Planescape setting, and Wizards of the Coast has taken advantage of that as recently as just this last year. But Rogue Trader isn't Planescape, and it definitely isn't Baldur's Gate. It's Owlcat, which, I am to understand, means the game is in a pretty rough state. I've seen discourse thrown at Rogue Trader ranging from literally unplayable up to you'll be fine so long as you download this cheat mod to skip combat, and that sounds pretty bad. So I'm gonna wait to give that a try. Plus, Guybrush Threepwood taught me to never spend more than $20 on a computer game, and 40's the lowest I've seen Rogue Trader thus far. I said, come on. Alas, my rogue trading and knowledge of what rogue trading consists of as a profession will have to wait. Luckily, Warhammer has welded itself onto a whole bunch of games of different sizes, scopes, and types. There's a Warhammer XCOM. There's a Warhammer Left 4 Dead. Hell, there's a Warhammer Doom now, too. If you find yourself in the unenviable position of having things in common with me, there's probably a game out there what says Warhammer on it that will tickle your fancy. Now, we all know I'm a story guy. I love RPGs, I love cinematics, I love Hideo Kojima. The numbers don't lie, I'm a genetic freak. But I don't exclusively love those things. I also love dumb things. See, liking RPGs, cinematics, and Hideo Kojima. That has, at times, extended to the world of really cool action-adventure and schlock.
Hey! What? Oh!
I love me some good schlock. You saw the RoboCop game I raved about, right? If not, you should. I need people to watch videos, please. Enter Warhammer 40K Space Marine Anniversary Edition. I vaguely remember hearing about this game around its release. THQ was pushing it pretty hard, at least to the average G4 viewer circa 2011. I was young, impressionable, easily fooled, but I still did not take the plunge on Warhammer. Even the lilting voice of Adam Sessler could not win me over. But here we are over a decade later, and the ghost of Western Sesslerin himself possessed me just long enough to find what Warhammer I already had in the old Steam library and install. Where Rogue Trader is a CRPG with the depth/strangeness and overhead perspective that are common in that genre, Space Marine's a third-person shooter. But it's not a chest-high wall cover shooter, no. Space Marine's hook, the thing that sets it apart from its contemporaries in the gameplay department, is that it frequently wants you in the middle of the action. Combat is a fluid mix of melee and gunplay that works better than I would have expected it to on paper. As a staunch defendant of the sometimes awkward but usually magnificent combat variety in Fable, this is immediately intriguing. I'm used to these games wanting you to hang back, take your time, and win a sort of battle of attrition between checkpoints. And Space Marine has those moments, but what's really interesting about the game is that these sometimes frustrating combat puzzles work their way in between rooms designed for charging and destroying as many enemies as possible. And they are, more often than not, satisfying to overcome. It's thrilling to get your ass handed to you by a particular room of orcs, load back in really quickly, and turn on your thinking brain. The combination of short load times and general combat feel works so that you feel constantly empowered. And really, that's what Space Marine is all about. Empowerment. Look, I don't have a great grasp on all the particulars of what happened in my adventure through Space Marine, but I do know this. Space Marines love to kill. Oh, dude, they revel in it. These guys are high-level characters multi-classing in Paladin and Cleric, muttering prayers to themselves as they cut through legions of orcs, or orcs with a K. The distinction seems important, but these Marines are acting without mercy or consideration. They are so into killing that they have the Doom Guy's glory kill power and can heal themselves by button prompting stunned enemies. Our main character for this romp, Captain Titus, is pretty much fully established in the opening chapter of the game. He is a space marine, he is held to some sort of code but knows when to interpret it a little more loosely, and during his drop toward the planet where his mission objectives are waiting, he takes a detour onto a big orc ship and single-handedly wrecks it. Not because he has to, mind you, but because he wants to. Hold on to that, because that's about as much character as you're going to get out of this guy. From that point on, he's doing his job, and his job is murder. Sorry. His job is liberation. Namely, liberating this planet from the orcs, I guess. For reasons. We spend most of the game in what they call a manufactorum, which I think is Warhammer talk for impossibly large and dominating factory. Apparently, the people who work here spend most of their lives, if not all of them, toiling away in the creation of munitions, weapons, and so on, in the name of some machine god. I don't know who that is. I still do not know who that is. I also don't know why so much of the architecture features, among other things, skulls. And they even build their answering machines out of skulls. Imagine landing on a planet and having to take a Skype call from a skull. And this is somewhere else Space Marine stands out, both for good and ill. It is not holding my hand through its liberal use of proper nouns.
I acquired specimens for experimentation. Orc, Tau, Eldar. Even a Tyrannid Lictor, which nearly caused a revolt among my tech priest allies. I designed the weapon to use the warp energies to target the weak points in the Xenos brain.
What in the fuck are you guys talking about? Jalapeno.
I am not given direct information on what things are, or a codex to reference, or any of that garbage. This is Warhammer, baby! And the wall you have to climb to even understand what the setting is about is part of the journey, I guess. If you ask around on where to start with Warhammer, you get different answers in different mediums. This game, or that book, or this webpage built in fucking Flash. And I don't think any of them really explain shit to you. Which, to be honest, I kind of like. It's like, you ever try to read Dune? The first 200 pages of Dune are basically a glossary, dressed up in fiction to sucker you into reading a fucking almanac before actually getting to any story. Warhammer is kind of like that, except every possible place you can start is a different glossary. But Captain Titus, he probably doesn't care about a lot of that bullshit, personally. He has a job to do and an empire of some kind that he is doing the job for. That's all I need to know. Every time he dies, he says some shit about living his life for the Emperor, and that tells me he's really bought into whatever it is we're doing here. Liberating, I guess. In a way, I like that too. Our main character has by default gone all in on the way this world works, and I can either waste my time questioning why, or just accept that I guess I am too. So long as, I'm driving this character. Oh, and by the way, here's a breadcrumb trail of cool upgrades and new weapons that'll keep things varied up for the next 7 hours. Now, do you have any questions? Asks Warhammer 40K Space Marine Anniversary Edition S Echoes of an Elusive Age for Nintendo Switch. No, sir. Please give me the next boomstick, sir. I say, a telltale whimper in my voice. That trail is excellently done in Space Marine. Levels are fast and visceral, with plenty of enemy encounters to work through between your next objective and the inevitable objective after that. Part 1 and Part 2 of the 5-part campaign offered new weapons with differing use cases at such a clip that there were a couple times I wasn't sure that I was ready for a new toy just yet. But like a spoiled little German boy in a house full of sweets, I could not help but waggle mine fingers and grab the new yum-yums. There's also distinct sections where the gameplay is changed more by temporary additions to your arsenal. A turret section here and there to be sure, but also multiple sections where you are given a jetpack, a ground pound move, and wide open areas in which to rain down hot righteousness, one assumes, on those machine godless orcs. I guess. Is it a religion thing? These were my favorite parts of the game, always eliciting a disappointed awe when Titus would inevitably shrug the awesome jetpack off because there isn't enough room out here, or it's out of fuel, or some other terrible excuse to remove the thing that allowed you to 1v1 God. I get it. The whole game can't be unstoppable action. It'd get boring, I guess. And the game was in danger of that a time or two just as a consequence of giving me the best wish fulfillment tools early on. An assault rifle, and a sword that is also a chainsaw. Now, I'm also not a Gears of War guy. That's another fiction I want to try to get into at some point. But even I know that an assault rifle and a chainsaw are a recipe for a good time. I have played Resident Evil 4, which also aims to teach this valuable lesson, albeit in a much different context. I don't know if it's really cool or really uncool to say that Space Marine is in a league with Resident Evil 4, but I'm saying it anyway. Similarly to RE4, this is a cool action movie of a video game. It's short, about 7 hours, and full of specific moments that are consistently satisfying. The glaring thing from my time with Space Marine is that even at its conclusion, I'm perplexed by its world. I've pieced some things together through context clues, but the importance of what has happened is lost on me. I believe that this is a wonderful way to experience Warhammer 40K Space Marine, but I have to talk about that experience now a little specifically, so let me say this. If the imagery on screen, or the description up to this point, has intrigued you, and you don't know anything about Warhammer, then jump in. Just go for it. See what you get out of it. Space Marine is an incredible video game, and I enjoy it both mechanically and presentationally. Playing this is the equivalent of seeing some licensed streaming show, binging it, and possibly never wading deeper into the pool. If you do, hey man, there's so much stuff you can check out, and I'm sure some guy on Reddit will be more than happy to tell you where to keep going, and why someone else is wrong about their answer to that same question. Have a ball, bud. You can join the rest of us at the time code on screen if you want a little extra goodness. So the story of Space Marine goes a little something like this. You, Titus Space Marine, are leading your two battle brothers, Old Brother and Young Brother, into battle. Old Brother has seen a lot, and is probably getting too old for this particular variety of shit. Young Brother is kind of wary of how you more experienced Space Marines get up to your Marine work in space. I should note here that I don't know what we're actually called. Sometimes the gang refers to themselves as Space Marines, but other times we call ourselves Ultramarines, which I find much funnier, personally. The objective of our little trio of Ultramarines is to liberate this planet Graia from orc invaders, who are moving hard on these manufactorums. Graia is what they call a forge world, which I think means the manufactorums are most, if not all, of the planet. Graia, the planet, is essentially a big tool in the ever-churning machine of war that is the Warhammer universe. A universe that they made sure to tell us up front was both grim and dark. You jump to the planet, taking a little opportunity to smash up a boat on the way down, as I said before, and start hoofing it through just so much warfare and death. You're naturally unfazed by any of this, being an Ultramarine and all. Everybody who isn't in a walking tank of armor is just in awe of you and your natural ability to sponge damage while healing yourself via a magic spell of chainsaw. These orcs are a real menace, but eventually you track down a very important person who is part of the Inquisition. This man is a psychic warlock, and he is a whiny one at that.
More of them! Dispatch them quickly! We must hurry!
He has built a weapon of mass destruction that will solve the planet's orc problem like a can of Raid solves a wasp problem. But he needs help getting the battery for it and then getting to where the battery should be used. Titus Space Marine isn't deterred and rampage kills his way to this magic D-cell. The number of orcs that fall in his wake is large enough to be both unfathomable and humorous. Titus fights his way to the magic D-cell and straight up grabs it, which surprises everybody. Apparently the magic in the battery is connected to the warp, which, as the name implies, is capable of corrupting a person pretty thoroughly. Young Brother is very suspicious of the fact that Titus could interact with this warp energy without losing his mind, which I guess is the natural consequence of warp exposure. The Inquisitor is also very suspicious, but he's just excited to have his battery and a walking three-man shield that's volunteering to take him to the big gun, which they do, fighting their way up to the weapon. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second and say that when the weapon of mass destruction was described to me earlier, I was envisioning a big gun. I've said as much even mere seconds ago. But that was not what I was given when we reached the weapon itself, which is less like a gun and more like a Byzantine cathedral. That's pretty weird. Oh well, better shove the battery in there. Surprise! The guy working in the organization that builds skulls into its technology is actually not on the up and up. He tricks you into releasing white phosphorus, but it turns out that instead of killing any orcs, it's the last ingredient for a summoning. A portal opens up, and all of a sudden...
Chaos demons! How is this possible?
You got new friends now, Space Marine!
Now, I know I don't know anything about Warhammer, but I wasn't expecting demons. Or demons with an A, the distinction seems important. So all of a sudden, my worldview of this fantasy war between humans and orcs in space is pulled out, while everyone within that fantasy is talking about it as casually as if they were saying, "It is Wednesday." The demons are part of an invasion that this demon, Nemeroth, is leading because if he uses the magic D-cell in the right way, he'll become a demon prince. I don't know what that means for him or for me, but I assume from the graveness of Titus Space Marine's voice as he says this fact, that it is decidedly not good. The following section is really cool mechanically, but I couldn't talk about it earlier without showing off the demons. After the invasion begins, these demons and the fear-looking guys working with them are just part of the ongoing conflict. The orcs and the demons will fight each other. It's really cool because sometimes they'll be so busy fighting one another that you can run in and cause mischief. And sometimes they'll realize that the 1 ton of metal, man-meat, and rage barreling toward them is the bigger threat, and put aside their differences for the good of the team. The team, of course, being invaders of this factory planet that was previously populated by some kind of working-class religion whose work with machines was their religion, I think? Everything comes to a head when Old Brother, who volunteers to hold the battery kind of out of nowhere, is killed by the baddest demon of them all, Nemeroth. Nemeroth takes the battery and gleefully runs away to this big spire where he will offer it up to his unholy gods in return for being made into, again, a demon prince. Titus Space Marine is not happy about Old Brother dying, so he commands Young Brother to stay behind and charges toward the spire alone. Along the way, he ends up being accompanied by some space or ultra or other some such marines who spout some lore at each other as I'm trying to focus on fighting the legion of dudes between me and the only place where a ship can land to take me to the spire, apparently. Once in the spire itself, it's a quick battle to the top thanks to the jetpack hammer combo. At the peak, we find Nemeroth offering the D-cell to Satan, or whomever. This turns into a weirdly built boss battle that is kind of novel and that it doesn't force the engine built mainly for fighting a bunch of guys at once into a situation where you're fighting one guy instead. Until it does, but bear with me. Little hordes of demons and fear guys come at you. You take them down by being smart and not charging into an unwinnable battle so many times that you have to wonder if you even have an adult brain. Then you confront Nemeroth, who tries to woo-woo you with this talk of falling to the dark side or succumbing to chaos or whatever, and Titus just straight up football tackles his ass off of this spire. And then the game ends with a Crash Bandicoot boss fight that feels kind of satisfying, but ultimately very strange. It's hard to describe. It's great just beating the ever-loving hell out of this evil demon man thing, and it's super great when you win, but the whole thing feels so out of place when the actual combat of the game was so satisfying on its own. The boss fights in Space Marine, generally speaking, are kind of weak points. There are only a few, and each is different in its own way, but each also feels out of place in its own way. Best I can figure, someone in testing must have realized that the combat system they developed wasn't actually that great at going one-on-one with big enemies, so they devised ways to work around that problem. I commend that kind of thinking that I'm imagining happened. However, I can't help but wonder if a better solution wouldn't have been to just, I don't know, spend some more time designing boss battles that weren't glorified minigames. Then we get our hook for a sequel that was canceled 2 years later, but maybe someone else is working on it now if they survive the embrace. Young Brother has reported you to the Inquisition because you were exposed to the Magic D-Cell's chaos magics with a K, and I'm making that distinction. Some slimy dude shows up with armed guards to escort you away, threatening you with violence toward Young Brother and any other Marines in your command if you don't come willingly. Titus Space Marine, the most Space Marine to ever Space Marine, accepts that this is undesirable and boards the Inquisitor's ship peacefully. Or as peacefully as one can when he's wearing a suit of power armor and carrying a gun that is still smoking from the myriad deaths it has dealt today. But Titus doesn't go without absolutely serving Young Brother for his inexperience and lack of faith.
The Codex Astartes is a set of rules. They guide us, shape us as Ultramarines, teach us to hold duty and honor sacred above all. But how we live with those rules is the true test of a Space Marine. And you have failed.
That's rough. A little text plays out saying that Titus is suspected of heresy and must be investigated, which I'm going to assume means some kind of magic torture, or maybe even just normal torture, just going by this guy's vibe. And that's it. That's the story of Space Marine. I don't know what happened really, but I liked it. It looked cool. Demons and orcs and big muscle dudes in space fighting some kind of unending war. It's almost by the numbers in what the plot here is doing, but that doesn't mean it isn't a fun adventure. I'd never really played a Warhammer game before, and I'd certainly never played a game from Relic Entertainment, so I looked them up after finishing. They mostly make real-time strategy games, many of which have been set in the Warhammer universe. Then something clicked for me. This is kind of a zoomed-in view of the sorts of things that just happen in an ongoing Warhammer war, right? Like, Titus Space Marine isn't really special, he's just an elite soldier on the ground taking on a special mission. In one of these RTS games, this sort of thing is something your eyes aren't even on because you're managing a conflict across a galaxy of theaters. In a way, this is the human part of Warhammer at play. You're seeing what one soldier, albeit an exceptional one, could go through. When I started thinking about the game through that lens, I went from enjoying it to really liking it. That's kind of experimental, in a way. Again, the narrative isn't going to blow your mind, or I'm going to assume, make you rethink any particular views you have about the Warhammer fiction. But it will show you a side of it you see much less often, which, in and of itself, is fascinating. Titus Space Marine isn't a character I'm going to remember. None of these meatheads are. But I'm going to be thinking about the fact that all of this crazy bullshit I just saw is kind of just stuff that happens on a Wednesday in this universe. Is it enough to make me break Threepwood's rule? No, not really. I like what I saw, really enjoyed it even, but I also feel fulfilled for now. I don't need more Warhammer, if you will. At least not yet. But I will admit that I want to jump in again sometime in the future. You know, if I get an itch. And thanks to how cool a lot of the set dressing in this fantasy world is, that'll happen sooner or later. For now, though, I need to refocus on this story about a different Marine in space. I'll see you then.
Tiptoe through the tulips with